Hello and welcome to Business Today Television. I'm Aabha Bakaya, and today we have some notable voices, industry experts joining us to really help us envision the opportunity for India going forward. This as we celebrate 30 years of the Business Today magazine. Sourav Majumdar, the editor of Business Today, joining me along with our guests. We have Nikhil Kamath of Zerodha, Manish Sabharwal of Team Lease, Suman Sinha of Renew Power and Deepak Bagla of Invest India. Gentlemen, great to have you with us, and I'm sure with this power-packed panel, we'll get a good 360-degree view of what's in store as we move forward on the India growth journey. Sourav, let me start off with you.
Thank you, Aabha. Gives me great pleasure to be here to talk about the 30th anniversary issue of Business Today. I will sort of get into it right away. And, basically, Manish, you spoke about regulatory cholesterol, leading to a creation of a nation of corporate dwarfs. That's your exact words, right? And those are pretty hard-hitting words. What is that context? What is this regulatory cholesterol you speak about, and how does one change that? What is your prescription for that?
In 1991, when we started, China and India had the same per capita GDP. Today, it's 5 times more than us. India doesn't have a shortage of land, labor, or capital, right? You could give every Indian household half an acre and they would fit into Rajasthan and maybe a little of Maharashtra. We don't have a shortage of labor. 40% of our labor force is Vela. We don't have a shortage of capital. $10 billion came in private equity to unicorns in July. $10 billion came in the last 6 months for India. So the challenge for India is how land, labor, and capital combine, what economists call total factor productivity. And I would make the case that that has been held back by the regulatory cholesterol of 67,000 employers, compliances, 6,700 filings, and it changed 8 times a day last year. So I think we left out education reform, we left out banking reform, but most importantly, we left out civil service reform or regulatory reform. Civil service really breeds this 67,000 compliances, right? So I think that mentality of prohibited till permitted, that mentality of writing the law for the chore, is really damaging in the long run to productivity. And so my case is this regulatory cholesterol is probably now one of the only binding constraints. I think obviously long-term stuff like healthcare and education and infrastructure you can always do better. But I think there are 3 kinds of reforms, right? There's capacity building reforms, which are really hard. There's institutional reforms, which are second. But the easiest reforms are flick of pen reforms. And reducing regulatory cholesterol is a flick of pen reforms.
So India has just hit the 50,000 registered startups mark. How do you see the future playing out? And just tell us the few things you've done since Invest India came into existence.
This, I think, is one of the most remarkable stories of New India. And this is one of those amazing stories which shows how policy, governance, good execution of policy, impactful execution of policy, and people in business getting together, all stakeholders, and see the magic it has created. Let me just put it in perspective. The Honorable Prime Minister launched Startup India in January 2016, as recent as that. We are in fact one of the youngest startup nations in the world. But just in a period of about 60 odd months, look where we are. We are number 3 in the world in number of unicorns, number 2 in the world in number of startups. So officially we have 50,000 startups registered with the government, but you have about 80 odd thousand in the marketplace. And we are number 1 in the world with new startups adding every day. The first part to it, look at the momentum which is getting created. The first 10,000 startups took us about 26 months. The fifth 10,000 startups took us just about 6 months. And the most interesting element, and for me, is that today over 600 districts of India have a registered startup with the government of India. So the other big element of startup, and why am I so enthusiastic about this as a momentum, is because this is what is creating the base for a new India. It's a new India which is going where the engines of growth are going to be bottom up. where it has reached the small nooks and crony corners, the small towns and cities and villages of India. And the other element which is very interesting out of it is that the kind of solutions which are coming out of startups in India, and because it is so diversified across geography, across number of issues which they are trying to address and number of solutions which they are trying to come up to, is that one, they're extremely impactful, two, very economical, three, easily scalable, very easily executable. And the other interesting element, I had one of the top global investors in our office, and this was just before the pandemic started. We're talking of 2019 October. And he wanted to meet about 20 odd of our startups. I got them to meet. He was given us 40 minutes. He walked into my office after 4 hours. He gave me his card and said, any startup in India looking for funding, please get them to get in touch with us directly. He said, the most amazing thing of your startups is that the solutions which they are bringing is not just for India, but applicable to more than 2/3 of the world's population.
Nikhil, let me come to you. Yes, we have seen an explosion when it comes to investors looking to tap into the opportunity, and with, of course, the digital world exploding, we've definitely seen ease of access and investor education. But tell me, where is this headed? While we have started to see value creation, we've seen a lot of deals happening even on the private side. It's not just the stock market that's been booming. This spate of public issues, this constant momentum that we continue to see in the stock markets, is it dizzying? Is it worrying? Is the retail investor going to get trapped?
Yeah, so the participation of retail in India, albeit the number has gone up, is still very small. We had about 1.5% of our population which had either directly or indirectly bought equity in their life ever. That relative to 50-60% in the West. That number has now gone up from 1.5 to maybe 2.25, but relative to our entire population, it's still a very small number. Also, in terms of valuation, if you were to compare today with any time in our own historical past, things do look a bit expensive, valuations do look frothy. Many of the new age IPOs one might be investing in today do not even have profitability or any kind of roadmap to profitability at hand today. So one has to be really careful, especially new investors, new traders coming into the market. They should have ample diversification and exercise caution when they are coming into the market at this elevated level, and B, they're buying companies which they don't have a history of analyzing or investing in.
Nikhil, I just wanted to jump in here. You write in your essay in the magazine issue also that there is a discrepancy between what is happening in the economy and the way the markets are moving, right? So how do you assess that? And I mean, what is the cause for this, and what do you think is going to happen? Because clearly there is and this has been discussed quite often. So what is your view on that?
Yeah, sure. So we were largely witnessing a slowdown in the economy pre-pandemic. If you take the Jan, Feb, March leading up to the pandemic, things were already slowing down and we were really worried. We had the lockdown number 1. We had a little bit of respite between phase 1 and phase 2. Then we had lockdown number 2. And in my own humble opinion, I'm no expert on, the pandemic or coronavirus, but if I had to wager a guess, if everywhere in the world, in countries which are much more vaccinated and much more, they have much more of a health infrastructure than us, if they're having a third and a fourth wave, it wouldn't be too far-fetched to assume that we will have it too. I don't think we should be complacent at this point of time and think, we are different or we are exceptional and corona will not come back in the third wave in another form. So in one way or another, I predict economic slowdown, more consumption-led slowdown, because if things are locked in, people will not be spending the kind of money they do in a normal environment. And factoring in all of that, factoring in how many different asset classes are moving today. Take commodities, for example. We have seen everything from steel, copper, crude. Everything has rallied like 50, 60, 70%. But the end product, which is made from these commodities, the prices there have not gone up. So right now, in the next few quarters, we will probably see acute pressure on margins on companies in different sectors. But beyond that, inflation is bound to resurface in the market. With inflation, our central bank has very few tools to cater to it, but to raise interest rates and take away liquidity from the economy. And if they were to do that, the already stretched corporate books, which have not really done well outside of spurts in the last 2 years, I think will be really stretched, and we will see some amount of some amount of issues and delinquencies at that point.
Sumant, we've been interacting now for several years. How would you describe the change in the industry in terms of the challenges you saw, let's say 10 years ago, to how we're seeing an evolution or a turning point today, if we can call it that? Where do you see us pivoting to and accelerating towards in the next few years?
Yeah, what's happened is that 10 years ago, everybody thought that renewable energy was expensive. It was a good thing to do from a climate standpoint, but it was expensive and therefore it required subsidies to get adopted. And nobody could look out 10 years and anticipate what might happen from a technology standpoint. But now we've seen the incredible cost reduction as a result of technology improvements. And I think that's going to serve as an example for a number of other areas within renewable energy and or within the clean energy sector more broadly. I think solar is going to be an example, but batteries are going down that same exact path. Hydrogen, I'm sure, will go down that same path as well. And I'm sure there will be technologies that will emerge in the future. They could be around carbon capture. They could be around usage, consumer usage applications like, for example, you're building windows getting converted to solar panels. Electric vehicles will become the norm. So I think as we look out 10 years, I'm pretty sure that we would have made a tremendous progress towards creating a true clean energy or clean economy. And the kinds of ways in which the future can evolve from a technology standpoint, from a consumer adoption standpoint, from the kind of products that we could look at, I think is going to be incredible to anticipate. And I don't think that we can even look into the future that far. And I have stopped doing that. I just try to look at 3-4 years out, if that, and try to anticipate what we need to do from that standpoint. And then, just keep rolling it forward every 3 or 4 years. Looking out 10 years in our industry is really hazardous.
Manish, we are talking about what's going to happen. We are witnessing what's going on in the markets, the kind of startups which are coming in with huge valuations and then coming into public markets. In your essay, you make another very interesting point that as we go along, you will see fewer, self-employed people and more professionalized, kind of ecosystem. Now that, in a sense, militates against this whole boom of self-employed startup founders, etc. And you say that not every self-employed person will succeed. That's a very interesting observation, and it's true. So where does that lead us to in terms of this? What's going on in the startup ecosystem, and what you foresee happening some years down the line?
I mean, India has the world's largest gig economy, but it's the informal gig economy, right? 50% of the labor force being self-employed is not a feature, it is a bug. The poor cannot afford to be unemployed, so they are self-employed. And essentially, they're self-exploiting, right? In the 1920s, there was this idiot Russian economist who convinced Nehru that small farms are viable because you don't pay your wife a salary, your kids a salary, and you don't pay rent. And he called it the theory of self-exploitation, right? And, a lot of Kirana stores in India, a lot of that is all self-exploitation, right? So I would say that if India wants to if the only lesson we've learned from COVID is that GDP per capita matters more than total GDP. We are 5th in the world in total GDP, but we are 138th in the world in per capita GDP. And one reason we are 138th is that 50% of our labor force is self-employed. So I'm actually quite optimistic that this self-employment coming down on an aggregate level at 50% is very different from the startup boom that you're seeing. Not everybody can be an entrepreneur, and not all entrepreneurship is viable. And we're finally fixing that mistake where we thought self-employment was a solution to India's per capita income.
Are you looking at some particular sectors where the Indian startups can really have a competitive advantage when they go global? What is the sort of recipe for that? Which are the sectors where you think Indian startups can really make a mark?
I'm very confident about that. See, one of the biggest things about Indian entrepreneurship, and that is our biggest strength, and I've always been saying that, and you will see the best of it now, is one, to be nimble in their business models. I mean, look at what happened during the COVID. We started off, please recollect, let me take you back to February 2020 or even March 2020 when it all started. We didn't have a single PPE in India. And by June, just 90 to 100 days later, we had PPBs enough, not just for India, but even to export them to countries like Europe and others. Our existing MSMEs, our existing startups pivoted their business models. And the same is the story of PPEs when I talk about even ventilators. The innovators came across, joined hands with larger manufacturing units, and we started getting all of them for the requirement which was there for the market. This is one of their biggest strengths. One is frugal innovation, the frugality, and the ability to create within a very limited set of resources. Two, the ability to manage constraints, a very big strength of an Indian entrepreneur and special startup. And as I told you, the ability to be nimble in their business models and to pivot them. You put these all four together. These are the recipe, these are the four quintessential pillars which are going to be required for any business, big or large, going forward in the world for any element of success. And the Indian entrepreneur is right there on all four of them. And what makes me further encouraged in my views, and I'm not just saying optimistic, but I'm saying very realistic when I look at my optimism, is that the access to finance for both MSMEs and startups is now going to be happening at a much easier and a faster rate. And one of the big things there is digitization. You see this entire growth of the Indian economy taking pace, and the pace of growth changing into a multiplier impact is basically riding on the digital boom created in India. That entire digital initiative of this government, when the Digital India was launched, from that perspective, it was not just the ability to create your business model, but the ability to access that marketplace easier and faster happened because of this digitization. Apart from the fact that it is one of the biggest forms for me, resulting in the transformation of India, which is where we are the cusp at, which is the biggest element of democratization of opportunity, of access to education, health, and everything else which is there in the system, to each and every citizen. And what that is doing is it is converting population into the strength of human development. And that is now going to be one of the other big elements which is propelling the growth of New India.
Nikhil, you've spoken a lot about the importance of ease of doing business, and this is something that we've, really reiterated time and again in the last few years in conversations that the government has also very proactively had with business leaders. Where do you feel we are when it comes to progress on that front? What more would you like to see, whether it's in terms of attracting investment into areas like manufacturing, or whether it's in steps that have already been taken, for instance, making it easier to list, for example, for some startups. So in some ways, we're already starting to see quite a lot of progress happening and, being a little bit more accommodating towards capital coming in. What more would you like to see?
Well, I think the government has taken the right steps and they're definitely moving in the right direction. The fact that, we're watching all these startups list today is testament to that in one way or another. everything that was spoken about SPACs and getting companies which have been previously listed in America to merge with Indian companies and create a easy route for them to raise capital quickly. The entire premise I thought was flawed at one level or another. We've had SPACs in one form or another for many decades now. Back in the day, I think in the 90s, the Americans would call it blank check companies. These are just an easy tool to circumvent regulation and compliance and should not be encouraged. So I totally am for easing regulation, allowing for the retail public of our country to be able to participate and buy into the innovation, which is actually driven by those same people who have allowed for these companies like Flipkart and Swiggy and Ola, all of these, and Zomato, and for all of these people to flourish. The people who are the clientele of the companies, it probably makes sense if they're allowed to buy equity in the company. Uh, Plenty needs to be done, I think, in terms of taxation, in terms of regulation. But I would say that the government is moving in the right direction, and hopefully they continue and things get better and easier for everyone.
Sumant, how do some of these plans also contribute to India's overall growth story? I mean, how is this critical in order to ensure that we really, grow as an economy and flourish and fulfill those energy needs?
So first of all, we now have lines, power lines going into every single home and every single village. And I think we just need to make sure that there is power in those lines as well on a 24/7 basis, which is reliable, which is affordable, and which is sustainable. And there, I think we still have work to do. And if we can get that done, then things like cooking, local pollution, a lot of those issues will get addressed. And those are things that everybody in India suffers from, not just the urban centers, but all of, let's say, North India, for example, suffers from pollution issues. So if we can clean up the environment, if we can clean up the air, if we can provide clean cooking gas or clean electricity to all the households of India, I think it lead to a significant improvement in people's quality of life and health and standard of living. So I think it has a tremendous impact and bearing on everybody's lives, because once you get power into homes, you can have so many more things happen. And there's so many houses, we do microgrids from a CSR standpoint, and when you are able to deliver power to homes which have not had power so far, the kind of impact it has on people's lives in terms of education, in terms of health, in terms of their productivity levels is just unbelievable. And I think therefore that there can be a massive improvement in people's living standards, productivity, efficiency, and so on, if we are actually able to make not just electricity, but clean electricity available to everybody in India.
All right, gentlemen. Thank you so much.